In 1949, a Canadian engineer named John Hopps was working on something quite ordinary. He was experimenting with a way to pasteurize beer using radio waves. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, and it was his project. So, when he was suddenly pulled away to help with a completely unrelated medical study, Hopps wasn't exactly thrilled, but life has a strange way of rewriting our plans. That interruption, which he once saw as an annoyance, would end up steering him toward one of the greatest medical breakthroughs of the 20th century. The call came from Toronto's Banting Institute, where two surgeons, Dr. Wilfred Bigelow and Dr. John Callahan, were wrestling with a problem in heart surgery. At the time, open-heart procedures were still experimental, and one approach they were testing involved lowering the patient's body temperature to slow down metabolism. Hypothermia made delicate surgery possible, but it also brought a deadly risk. The heart would sometimes stop beating completely. The surgeons asked a simple but radical question: could an artificial electrical impulse restart the heart? That's where John Hopps came in. He didn't know much about hearts, but he understood electronics and radio waves. Working at the National Research Council of Canada, he began building a device that could generate controlled electrical signals strong enough to make a silent heart beat again. By 1950, Hopps had built a machine unlike anything the world had seen. Imagine a heavy, 30-centimeter box filled with vacuum tubes, wires, and dials. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't safe. In fact, it plugged straight into the wall, which meant anyone using it risked electrocution. But innovation often begins with something raw and imperfect. The real test came not in theory, but in practice. Using a laboratory dog, the team deliberately stopped the animal's heart under controlled conditions. Then, they connected Hopps' machine. A pulse of electricity traveled down a catheter wire, reached the heart, and, suddenly, the heart began to beat again. In that moment, they had proven something extraordinary. A living heart could be controlled from the outside by human technology. Hopps himself gave the device a name. He called it the pacemaker. But his work didn't stop there. He realized that if the electrical impulse could reach the heart through a catheter, it meant doctors wouldn't always have to cut open a patient's chest. This innovation, known as the transvenous electrode, became one of the most important breakthroughs in cardiac care. By guiding a catheter through the jugular vein, doctors could reach the heart safely and efficiently, paving the way for minimally invasive procedures we take for granted today. Of course, Hopps' first pacemaker was far from practical. It was bulky. It had to sit outside the body, and patients couldn't live tethered to a giant wall-powered box for the rest of their lives. But the seed had been planted. Hopps had shown the world what was possible. Only a few years later, in 1958, a Swedish team took his idea even further. They built the world's first fully implantable pacemaker for a human patient. For the first time, people with dangerously irregular heart rhythms had a lifeline that could travel with them, beating in rhythm with their lives. It's worth pausing here to think about just how much this invention has changed the world. Before the pacemaker, sudden cardiac arrest was almost always fatal. Doctors had no way to bring a stopped heart back to life except crude and temporary methods. Today, millions of people around the globe live full lives because of pacemakers, small devices that sit quietly inside the body, sending out precise pulses, keeping the rhythm of life steady. And it all began with a man who didn't even want to work on the project. John Hopps once joked that he had been dragged into the study against his will. He thought his job was beer and radio waves, not hearts and surgery. But that twist of fate gave him a role in medical history that few engineers could have imagined. Looking back, his story reminds us of something powerful. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs don't come from passion alone. They come from being open to the unexpected, from embracing interruptions, and from seeing possibilities where others see only problems. Hopps' pacemaker was not perfect, but it was the beginning. Others refined it, miniaturized it, and made it safer. Today, pacemakers are so advanced that some can be implanted without surgery, running for years on a tiny battery, tracking data, and adjusting in real time to a patient's needs. But none of it would have happened without that first clunky machine, the 30-centimeter box with vacuum tubes, that dared to shock a silent heart back to life. John Hopps may have started out working on beer, but he ended up saving countless lives. And that is the legacy of a reluctant engineer who, by chance, changed medicine forever. But the story of the pacemaker did not end in 1950. In fact, that was only the first heartbeat of a much larger journey. In the years that followed, researchers and doctors around the world took Hopps' idea and tried to make it smaller, safer, and more practical. One of the biggest problems with his original design was its reliance on being plugged into a wall. Imagine living your entire life attached to a machine that you couldn't move away from. Clearly, that wasn't a solution for patients. The next challenge was portability. By the mid-1950s, scientists began experimenting with battery-powered versions. These were still large and clunky by today's standards, but at least they could be moved around. Then came a revolutionary step in 1958, in Sweden. Surgeons Åke Senning and engineer Rune Elmqvist created the world's first implantable pacemaker. It was about the size of a hockey puck and powered by rechargeable batteries. Their first patient was a man named Arne Larsson, who suffered from life-threatening heart rhythm problems. Doctors implanted the device under his skin, connecting it to his heart with wires. That first pacemaker failed after just 3 hours. But Senning and Elmqvist replaced it with another, and when that one failed, they replaced it again. In fact, throughout his life, Arne Larsson would receive 26 different pacemakers as technology advanced. He lived until the age of 86, far longer than doctors expected, thanks to a device that had not even existed when he was a young man. His story became living proof of the pacemaker's power to change destiny. Through the 1960s and 70s, pacemakers grew more reliable. Transistor technology replaced bulky vacuum tubes, shrinking the devices dramatically. Batteries improved as well. The early versions required frequent replacements, but soon, long-lasting lithium batteries were introduced, allowing patients to go years without surgery. By the 1980s, pacemakers were not just keeping hearts beating, they were becoming smarter. Engineers developed programmable pacemakers, which could adjust their rhythm according to the patient's needs. Later came rate-responsive pacemakers, capable of detecting when a person was exercising or resting, and adjusting accordingly. This meant the device didn't just keep a steady beat, it worked in harmony with the patient's lifestyle. But progress was not without challenges. There were cases of early devices malfunctioning, of wires breaking, of batteries failing at critical moments. Each failure was tragic, but each one also pushed the technology forward, forcing manufacturers to innovate, improve safety, and earn the trust of patients worldwide. Today, pacemakers are marvels of engineering. They are smaller than a matchbox, implanted with minimally invasive techniques, and can last up to 15 years on a single battery. Some even communicate wirelessly with doctors, sending data remotely so heart conditions can be monitored in real time. And in the last decade, a new breakthrough arrived: leadless pacemakers, devices so tiny they can be placed directly inside the heart without wires at all. From Johns Hopkins' giant 30-centimeter vacuum tube box to a device smaller than a vitamin pill, this is one of the most astonishing journeys in medical technology. And yet, the impact goes beyond machines. Think of the millions of lives quietly extended, the fathers and mothers who lived to see their children grow, the children born who might never have known their grandparents otherwise. Behind every pacemaker is not just a patient, it's a story of years gained, of love preserved, of life continuing. Johns Hopkins himself lived to see how far his reluctant invention had come. He became known as the father of biomedical engineering in Canada, and though his first machine never entered hospitals, its legacy echoes in every pacemaker implanted today. Sometimes, history celebrates heroes who set out boldly with a clear mission. But just as often, it is shaped by people like Hopps, who stumble upon greatness while following a completely different path. A man who started with beer and radio waves ended with saving hearts. The next time you hear the steady rhythm of a heartbeat, remember that it may not just be nature at work. For millions of people around the world, that sound is part human, part machine, a quiet partnership born out of one engineer's interrupted project in 1949. And it all started because Johns Hopkins got pulled away from his work, and answered a call he never expected.